In 1346, in the city of Caffa on the Crimean Peninsula, a terrifying scene unfolded that would later become one of the most infamous moments in the history of biological warfare. The Genoese defenders stood behind their massive stone walls, looking up at the sky in disbelief. What was falling from above was not arrows, stones, or flaming projectiles. Instead, rotting human corpses were flying through the air. Outside the city, the Mongol army of the Golden Horde, commanded by Khan Jani Beg, had positioned powerful trebuchets. Using these siege engines, they launched the bodies of their own dead soldiers over the walls of the city. The bloated corpses crashed into streets, shattered rooftops, and landed in courtyards throughout Caffa. The smell of decay quickly spread through the city, overwhelming its inhabitants. The defenders rushed to deal with the horrifying situation. With little protection and no understanding of the danger they faced, they dragged the decaying bodies through the streets with their bare hands. They attempted to dispose of them as quickly as possible, often throwing them into the Black Sea. However, their desperate efforts came too late. These corpses were not merely the dead. They were carriers of a deadly disease. Many of the Mongol soldiers who had died were infected with bubonic plague, a disease that had already been devastating the Mongol army for months. Victims of the plague suffered from high fever and painful black swellings known as buboes, which typically appeared in the armpits or groin. Once the disease entered the crowded city of Caffa, it spread rapidly among the population. Within days, people throughout the city began showing symptoms. Fever swept through households, and the distinctive black swellings appeared on victims' bodies. Fear and confusion spread just as quickly as the disease itself. Desperate to escape the growing catastrophe, Genoese merchants and sailors fled the city aboard ships. Their destinations included major Mediterranean ports such as Genoa, Venice, and Constantinople. Unfortunately, many of these refugees were already infected with the plague. Without realizing it, they carried the deadly disease with them. These ships would unknowingly become the vehicles that introduced the plague to Europe. Over the following years, the disease would spread across the continent in a pandemic known as the Black Death, killing an estimated 25 to 50 million people, perhaps up to two-thirds of Europe's population. The siege of Caffa did not begin as a biological disaster. It was the result of political tension and conflict between the Genoese trading colonies and their Mongol rulers. The Golden Horde, descendants of the empire created by Genghis Khan, had controlled the Crimean region since the early 13th century. Caffa itself had been founded by Genoese merchants in 1266. Located on the southeastern coast of Crimea, the city became one of the most important trading hubs in the region. It connected merchants from the Mediterranean world with caravan routes that stretched across Central Asia and even to the Far East. By the 1340s, Caffa had grown into a thriving and cosmopolitan city. The inner walls contained around 6,000 houses, while another 11,000 homes stood within the outer walls. The population was diverse, including Genoese, Venetians, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Mongols, and Turks. The city's wealth came from trade. Merchants dealt in valuable goods such as silk, spices, grain, and other commodities traveling between Europe and Asia. However, one particularly grim aspect of Caffa's economy was the slave trade. Many captives, especially Turks and other peoples from the surrounding regions, were sold and transported to Egypt, where they served in the Mamluk Sultanate. Relations between the Genoese colonists and their Mongol rulers were often tense. In 1308, a Mongol ruler named Khan Takhta laid siege to Caffa because of disputes over the slave trade. The Genoese were forced to burn their own city and flee. Later, his successor Beg Khan allowed them to return, and Caffa once again flourished. However, when Jani Beg, the son of Beg, became ruler, tensions rose again. In 1343, a violent conflict between Italian merchants and Muslim traders in the nearby trading town of Tana escalated into a serious diplomatic crisis. Jani Beg responded by launching a major military campaign against both Tana and Caffa. The Mongol army surrounded Caffa and attempted to capture it. However, the Genoese defenders were protected by strong concentric stone walls and had access to supplies arriving by sea. In February 1344, A relief force from Italy arrived and managed to inflict heavy losses on the Mongols, reportedly killing 15,000 soldiers and destroying many siege engines. Humiliated, Jani Beg temporarily withdrew his forces. But the conflict was far from over. In 1345, he returned with a new strategy. Instead of directly assaulting the city, he planned to starve Caffa into submission by cutting off all land supply routes. The Genoese relied heavily on ships to bring food and supplies. But the siege continued for months without a decisive outcome. Both sides were locked in a brutal stalemate. Then, in 1346, disaster struck the Mongol army. A deadly disease suddenly erupted within the Mongol encampments surrounding the city. Soldiers began dying in enormous numbers. Contemporary accounts describe thousands of deaths occurring every day. The Mongol army, which had once appeared powerful and unstoppable, began to collapse. One of the most important historical descriptions of these events comes from an Italian notary named Gabriele de Mussi, who wrote about the plague shortly after the events occurred. Although he was not present at the siege himself, his account vividly describes the devastation. According to his writings, the Mongol soldiers developed painful swellings in the armpits or groin, followed by severe fever and rapid death. Medical knowledge at the time was limited, and most people believed diseases were caused by miasma, or poisonous air and vapors. The Mongols understood that the disease could spread through contact with the sick or the dead, but they had no knowledge of the real cause. In reality, the plague was caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, which was primarily transmitted by fleas living on rats. Facing the destruction of his army, Jani Beg reportedly ordered a desperate measure. According to de Mussi, the Mongols loaded the bodies of their plague-stricken dead into catapults and launched them over the walls of the city. Whether this was intended as a deliberate act of biological warfare or simply a way to dispose of the bodies while frightening the defenders, the result was catastrophic. The Genoese defenders had to handle the infected corpses directly. Many had cuts and wounds from combat, making it easier for the disease to enter their bodies. Modern epidemiological research suggests that around 20% of plague transmission can occur through direct contact with infected tissue. In the crowded conditions of a medieval city, this made an outbreak almost inevitable. Eventually, in 1347, Jani Beg abandoned the siege. His army had been shattered by disease, but the plague was now firmly established inside Caffa. The fleeing merchants and sailors carried the disease with them across the Mediterranean. Ships arrived in ports such as Constantinople, Messina, Genoa, and Venice, bringing with them the infection that would soon spread across Europe. From these ports, the plague moved rapidly along trade routes. Within a few years, it devastated cities and villages across Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia. Entire communities disappeared. Economies collapsed, labor shortages transformed social structures, and the trauma left a deep mark on European civilization. Historians still debate whether the famous corpse catapulting incident truly happened exactly as described. Because de Mussi was not an eyewitness, some scholars question the reliability of his account. Others believe that the plague may have entered the city through rats and fleas traveling between the Mongol camp and the city itself. Nevertheless, many modern researchers consider the story plausible. Even the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, has noted that the incident represents one of the earliest documented examples of possible biological warfare. Whether intentional or accidental, the events at Caffa demonstrate how warfare, trade, and disease can combine in unpredictable ways. What began as a desperate attempt to break a siege may have helped trigger one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. The siege of Caffa stands as a powerful reminder that weaponizing disease can produce consequences far beyond the battlefield, transforming a local conflict into a catastrophe that reshapes entire civilizations.